I'm Paul Sullivan, your host on the Company of Dads podcast, where we explore the sweet, sublime, strange, and silly aspects of being a lead dad in a world where men often feel they have to hide or at least not talk about their parenting role. I know this from firsthand experience as the lead dad to my 3 girls, 3 dogs, 3 cats, and somewhat remarkably, 3 fish who are still alive. I did this all while managing my career and striving to be an above average husband. One thing I know for sure about being a lead dad is it's not a normal role. You're not doing what dads have traditionally done, going to work and leaving the parenting to mom or someone else. Nor are you always welcome into the world where moms are the primary caregivers. But here at the Company of Dads, our goal is to shake all that off and focus on what really matters: family, friendship, finance, and fun. Today, my guest is J.R. Havlan, a comedy writer turned former comedy writer, and of course, a lead dad. JR was a head writer for The Daily Show when Jon Stewart was a host. During those 18 years, he won 8 Emmy Awards. He wrote for 2 Academy Award shows, one when Crash won Best Picture, and again, when No Country for Old Men won, 2 movies that are not funny at all. He's written books, consulted for The Tonight Show, and done stand-up around New York and on several late-night shows. He also has 2 children, ages 10 and 12, and is a lead dad to them and his wife, who runs a school food program. Welcome to the show, JR. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I love it. I have 2 corrections.
Oh, okay.
One correction, one edit.
That No Country for Old Men was really a funny film. Is that what you're going to say?
No, I have a good story about Javier Bardem though. But the correction is that I was not the head writer. People like to say that, but I was not. I was a head writer of shows after The Daily Show, but never of The Daily Show. So I like to make that clear because it's a distinctly different job from being a staff writer. And so out of respect for the people who were that, I always like to make that clear. Secondly, I want to do a little rewrite on your basic intro for the show. Do you want to hear it?
Sure.
Okay, so you say that you're a dad to the 3 kids, 3 dogs, and somewhat remarkably 3 fish.
Yeah.
Who are still alive.
Yes.
I think you should say 3 kids, 3 dogs, and 3 fish who are somewhat remarkably still alive.
All right.
Yeah.
We'll take it to the writer's room. We'll discuss it out.
Just an example of why I get the big buck.
We'll hash it out in the writer's room. I like that.
Yeah. That's always it's always a different. And then there's the head writer who gets to say which one you do. And that's why it did in the end suck not to be the head writer. And when I became a head writer in another show, it was a different job, very hard job, but a better job because you got to make more final choices.
Did you sort of wield your power without mercy?
Of course.
Yeah. Okay,
what else is power for? Why have power? Don't you watch Game of Thrones?
Is that what a comedy writing room is really like for a show? Is it Game of Thrones?
It's like Game of Thrones. Yeah. There's a lot of beheadings and stabbings and
shit just sets on fire all of a sudden. And
yeah.
All right. I'm the head writer here. I'm asking the questions. All right. I want to start with the basics. What does JR stand for? What's JR stand for?
Oh, well, geez, you sound like
Is that secret?
Sound like security guards at the airport. Every time.
Yeah.
It's J is an initial, which is constantly hard to explain, and has given me grief in the past. A cop who pulled me over for not speeding, but for following too closely. One time, I got pulled over for following too closely. This is many years ago, and since my first name is just J, just the initial J, he didn't believe me, and even though it was on my license, and was threatening very aggressively to bring me in unless I revealed my first name. And
did you just make something up? Did you just make something? Just say John?
No. I mean, I told him what my name is. I always say it's like G. Gordon Liddy. And he's like, "Who's G. Gordon Liddy?" And I was like, "Well, I can't explain it. I can't go any further than that. I don't have a boatload of examples for you. But sometimes somebody's name is just an initial. That's me." And the R is for Robertson. My dad was Robert, and I'm Robert's son.
For real?
Yeah.
That sounds like very like Scottish.
See what I mean? See what your reaction is? Like, for real? All right, come with me. Turn around. Put your hands on the car. That's what I get all the time.
He arrested you. I would have arrested you if I was him.
No, he didn't arrest. I can't remember what the end of it was, except that I got a ticket for following too closely. Like,
Wow.
the guy did not have anything better to do that
What,
day.
so at what point did you say, okay, I can't go through, is it like middle school? I can't go through middle school as Jay Robertson Havlan. I'm just going to be JR. When did that, when
Well,
did it all just get shortened?
I didn't go through middle school as J. Robertson Havlin or JR. I went through middle school as Rob, or, to any girl who was at least a year older than me, Robbie, which was always a little bit belittling, but my only,
at least they were talking to you though. They were talking to you.
Yeah, they were talking to me. And my only control over the matter was to insist that it be spelled IE instead of Y. I don't know why, but I don't know what power that gave me.
Oh my goodness. So you went to college for comedy writing, naturally, right? No, you went to college.
Yes, yeah, I majored in comedy writing.
Comedy writing. Is it true? You like a finance or business degree? Is this? I read this somewhere.
Yeah.
Is this correct? And
Yes.
then that business is funny, so that set you up to enter the world.
Yeah, it was a natural progression. I knew what I was going to do the whole time. My parents knew the whole time. I'm going to study finance.
So you just told them you're
like,
moving. You moved to New York. You're going to work on Wall Street, and you moved the New York part, and you worked at a comedy club on Wall Street. How did that happen when you first moved to the city?
Well, Wall Street wasn't working much when I moved to New York, and that was just a matter of timing, which I needed later. I had very bad timing in business school, but fortunately better timing in comedy, because when I graduated in December of 1987, a month and a half after one of the biggest crashes in history. So I come to New York trying to find a job, and all I find are people walking out of their offices with a box with a sad little plant hanging out of it instead. So
right.
I didn't think like, so there's openings, or, what do you do at that point?
So you think you're going to get a good desk? All the great desks had been cleared out. You're going to start out, get a good office. You had
all these people streaming out of here. There's no way I'm not getting a corner office, right? I just march right in there. You picked the right guy to replace the 1,000 people you just had to fire.
So what happens then? So you're not going to get a job working in finance. There isn't really a job board that says, wanted stand-up comedian. It's a very it's a very entrepreneurial thing to do. You've got to put yourself out there, write your own jokes, get up there. How did that come about, and what was the progression from that to becoming a writer on a show?
Well, when I was in college, I worked the whole time, and a lot of what I did was waiting tables, and that gives you the freedom. I mean, I think it's a fairly basic college job, or at least was when I was in it. And so right after I was done, I had lined up this trip out here in December to come out here and interview.
Yeah.
And then that was already lined up, and then the crash happened, but I still had the tickets. So I was like, well, fuck, I'm going to go to New York. Why not? I'd never really been out of Northern California, the East Bay, where I lived and grew up and went to school. And so I came out anyway, and I loved it. I loved it out here. I met a few people that gave me an opportunity to move out here, or to make the decision to do that. So I spent a week here, went home, sold everything I had, packed up a couple of boxes and suitcases, and moved out here because I had interviewed for a job at a very fancy restaurant while I was here on that vacation. Okay. And I had suits. I had a suit because I was going to be doing business interviews.
You did no interviews though for a finance job.
No, everything just fell flat. Yeah.
Right.
Everything completely fell flat. So, if I had anything lined up, it was just like, we're going to not do that right now, contact us later. But I did have a suit. So there was I don't know where I found it back then. This is 87 or 88. So it was like in the Village Voice or something,
Yeah. Yeah.
And just restaurant looking, hiring. And it was a fancy French restaurant, like 3-star French restaurant called Aurora, owned by the same guy who owned the Rainbow Room. Oh, okay. And I didn't know anything about any of this. The places I worked at were like, TGI Fridays type of places. So, but I put my suit on because I knew it was a fancy place. And I walk in there and, there was a woman who was the maitre d' and she liked me. And I said, I'm going to come back in a month. She said, well, you can start working then. And I didn't know whether or not she was going to keep her word on that, but
Yeah.
I sold my shit, came out here. I think I had 3,000 in my pocket. And I found a shitty studio apartment in the East Village and spent all my money just getting that apartment. Yep. And then started work the next day.
Wow.
And I started waiting tables.
Did you know anybody?
No, I didn't know anybody. No, I knew I came out with a friend and had met her aunt who encouraged me to come out and said, I actually crashed with her for a week before I got my place.
The aunt.
Yeah.
And did you know you were going to, what did you think you were going to do? Did you think you were going to do stand-up? Or did you have any idea whatsoever?
I thought I was going to not do what I was doing at home, which was not much of anything. And I grew up, I'd been out there the whole time, that's just where I always was. And I just wanted to go somewhere else. It was an adventure as much as anything else. Let's see how this pans out. A friend of mine insists I had talked to him about doing stand-up when I came out here, but I don't recall that. I don't remember that being like, I'm going to go make a name for myself. I'm going to go make it in New York kind of thing. But I was working at the restaurant for a little while. I mean, this was a really fancy place with captains and back waiters and like tuxedos, the whole nine. Yeah. And a famous French drunk chef. I mean, it was just like cut right out of the cloth of this fancy restaurant.
Like Ratatouille? Is that what we're talking about here?
Sorry?
Like the movie Ratatouille?
Like Ratatouille, but the rat is fat and red-faced and drunk and screaming at everybody. And a human with a French name. And so a little different, same but different.
Same premise, but.
So there was a woman there who, she was a waiter with me, and I'm out there, I'm just kind of cracking wise. It's just my nature, and everybody's having fun, and I'm, either trying to be funny or naturally being funny or both. And at one point she says to me, she shows me a thing like for the new school or one of those old school, like the little classes. It's a pamphlet, all these different classes, how to make a basket. And just remember, they used to have these like, okay, you can do anything. And one of them was a stand-up comedy class. And she said, you should take this. And I was like, nah, I don't think so, man. And then I let it go. And then like a month or two later, she came back up to me with the thing again and said, I really think you should do this. And it was such a weird thing to push, And so, I was like, you know what, I'll go. And so I did sign up for this class. The guy who gave the class was not particularly funny, which was a weird introduction. And but I met some other people who were doing it, and I learned where I could go to do it. And what the end of the class was that you got to perform at Stand Up New York. And I did that. And then I just kind of started doing it. And then I would do it all the time and found all the open mics and just kept doing that. And eventually got a job writing jokes for Bill Maher when he was at Politically Incorrect, by asking a friend who worked there. And they gave me the fax number. I was faxing in jokes.
So did you have a fax machine? Would you have a fax machine in your apartment? What would you do?
I did, yeah. Yeah, wow. Remember fax machines they're sort of like printers these days. You buy it for $70 and then they get all their money some other way. I don't really even know. But eventually I did. Yeah, I did. I had to buy it because I was it's probably doing it at first from something at work, but they started using my jokes, $50 a pop, and they were using a pretty good chunk of them. And then I started doing the warm up there and got my foot in the door and worked at a bunch of clubs, and then passed at the major clubs in the city, worked around the city, and then met Liz Winstead, who was one of the creators of The Daily Show. And she asked me to submit to that along with, at that time, so like 100 other people. And there were 5 of us at the beginning, and I got chosen as one of them, fortunately. Wow. And then when we won our first Emmy later, when Jon took over, we won our first Emmy in 2001. And, it had been 10 years, 11 years since I worked in that restaurant, and probably as long since I'd seen that woman. Yeah. Her name's Jeannie Arsbacher. So I looked her up and I took her out to dinner.
That's sweet. Did you
Yeah.
bring the Emmy? Did you bring the Emmy with you?
I did. And we went to
Yeah.
dinner at another restaurant that we used to work at. And we brought the Emmy and stuck it in the middle of the table. And everybody was coming over and they were all thrilled. And, all of a sudden the manager, who was a fucking dick to me all the time, is being all nice. Goes, this guy was the worst. Now he's like, Mr.
Mr. Havlan, so nice to have you here. It's been so long. You said 5 people in the beginning. What was it like? I mean, creating a show, we have my background is economics. And so you have these different sort of biases, this sort of success bias. We look back and we say, wow, he wrote for The Daily Show. It was amazing. But of course, it became amazing. It was just a show that was starting out and so many shows fail. So what was it? What was the special sauce? What was happening when the 5 of you were in the writer's room, creating the show that, went on to become sort of a staple of American culture?
Well, you're always kind of winging it. I had a podcast I did for a while called Writer's Block. And one of the guys I interviewed was this guy, Mike Reese, who was one of the original writers on The Simpsons. And I was asking him, like at that point, 20 years later or something, I'm saying, how did you create this world? And he said, well, it wasn't that world when we started. We were just winging it and created it as we went along. We needed a cop. We created Wiggum, that kind of thing. I mean, that's just what they did. And it was sort of the same thing. I mean, if you look at the original packet, which I'm not sure I still have, my original submission to the show to get the job, it probably has nothing to do with anything that we ended up doing. They just liked a few jokes in there. They liked the tone. The only thing that I had in there that actually has existed still to this day was I pitched Back in Black with Lewis Black. Like, I hadn't named it.
Yeah.
And I hadn't really defined it, but I liked Lewis. And, I mean, literally, this is the internet is kind of just taking off at that point. I mean, people barely even had laptops, right? So the whole pitch was like, let's get Lewis at the desk in front of a laptop, just going nuts over everything that he reads on the internet. That was the pitch. Yeah. And it started right away, and he's done it for 25 years or something.
It worked out pretty well. Who is
Craig Kilborn.
Oh, of course.
Craig Kilborn from ESPN. Yeah. But I think they wanted Jon Stewart. They might have even offered it to him at the beginning. And he didn't do it. And then when Craig was leaving, which was only 2.5 years in, then they started looking around for a Jon Stewart type. They auditioned tons and tons of people. And some of them were really, really good, including Michael McKean was fantastic. And oh God, what's his name? You know that show Dirty Jobs? Mike something. I can't, his last name's escaping me, but he's in commercials about car tires and shit now too. But he was also fantastic. It was really interesting to watch everybody. And then they hired Jon. It's one of those classic things. Give me a Jon Stewart type. They spend all kinds of money and time and get people's hopes up, and then they hire Jon Stewart. Back up the truck, and they hire the guy they wanted in the first
Who
place.
is, of course, a Jon Stewart type. So it makes sense. They got the most Jon Stewart
type. Yeah.
How much did the room grow? It starts off at 5. How many writers are there? As the show starts to get big and starts to rack up Emmys.
Well, we got a 6th writer pretty quickly because I was the only one without somebody kind of on my team, because there were 2 writers in one office, 2 writers in one office, and then me. And, so I didn't really have anybody to bounce stuff off of and stuff. So it was a few months in, we got a 6th writer, and then it's slowly built. We didn't get probably 7 and 8 for at least a year is my guess. And back then we were just writing jokes. I mean, the style of the show was very, very different. We were just cranking out as many jokes as we could about any topic that we could think of. Yeah. We weren't really focused on politics, and we weren't at all focused on the media. So we were really just, we had segment ideas. We had you work out how the show is going to present itself, different segments that we had where we got Liz on the air with one segment called He Said Winstead, because her name's Liz Winstead. Yeah. So she would go on and debate a topic with Craig on the air, and they're like polar opposites. So that was always kind of fun to do. And we had Lewis's thing, and then we just, split it up into one thing we had back then that they retained all through Jon was headlines, and then this just in and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So just kind of naming the segments but back then we're writing jokes about anything that was kind of top of the news. If Justin Timberlake did something, we were all over it. And now if Justin Timberlake does something, they don't care. And rightfully so, it's not their gig anymore.
Yeah.
It wasn't until the second year that Jon was there. It was actually pretty quickly, but it was the second year, which ended up being 2000 because he started in the beginning of 99. So he took a year kind of massaging it and easing into it. And then in 2000, he was like, all right, we got an election coming up. We're going to have to, we should focus on this. And for the most part, and start getting a little more serious about it and really defining the show more. And look, I don't know if that's exactly what was going on behind closed doors. I wasn't in on a lot of those planning sessions at that point, but that's essentially what happened. And it worked out because, of course, the 2000 election was a shit show. And we were really kind of the only ones, not only capable of, in a position to cover it the way that we did, but also just kind of capable of it. I mean, there weren't other shows that really did that, and the late night shows weren't set up to do that. And SNL wasn't doing that kind of stuff. So everything just took off from there.
When you think this wasn't something that you planned in your career, this is, careers often sort of evolve as we're going along, but what did it feel like as you went from, year 1 to 2, and I think you were there, 13, 14 years? How did it build? And I mean, it's, tremendously prestigious to have done this, but of course it's a job like any other. So, what were the pluses and minuses for you writing for The Daily Show?
Well, the plus was getting the job in the first place. I was at the kind of end of my rope. I was never one to spend much money or like climb into debt very freely. But I think when I actually was told I got the job, I think I had like $8,000 on my credit card or something like that, which to me was just a fortune. Like, what the hell am I going to do about this?
Yeah.
And it was not the greatest position. So all of a sudden I get this job, and the pay was twice as much as I'd ever made in my life, but I never made very much in my life. So that wasn't a tremendous amount, but it was certainly way more than I ever made. And I was able to get out of debt, and I had this job, and I kind of loved it, and it was doing well. And we were having a whole lot of fun because we're just, like the one guy said, like Mike Reese said, we're making it up as we're going along. And the whole goal is just to write the best joke and try to get it on the air. And then 2.5 years go by. First of all, I can't believe now we've been there for 2.5 years and the show is doing really well and everybody likes it.
Yeah.
And then Craig leaves and Jon comes in. So now we've got a new kind of thing going on with Jon. And we weren't sure how that was going to work out. Before that, Jon was sort of, he had his late night show and he was a stand-up, and I knew him, but not very well. But he was just like a kind of a leather jacket wearing, chain smoking stand-up guy. And we weren't sure whether or not he wanted even to fit into that or if he was going to change it. We didn't know. But he did a great job of transitioning into it and then changing it and making it more interesting. And so that became kind of a new job when Jon got there. And the money got better immediately because as a group, the writers kind of held out and said, you're going to change the host and give him a bunch of money. You got to give some of that to us. And it worked. None of us could believe it. None of us could believe it. We immediately got like a pretty significant raise. And then, a couple of years later, we win an Emmy. And so now it's another new job. It just kind of kept evolving in such a way where I didn't feel stagnant in it.
Yep.
And so that was great. And then we joined the union in 2005, and that was a big deal. It was a hard thing to do, but we got another big, huge raise when we joined the union. And so the money was kind of piling in, which was nice and didn't make me think, oh, I got to go find something else because this is nowhere. And then we kept winning Emmys, and it kept being fun, and everything just got bigger and better and brighter. And then I was there for 18 years actually, and then it finally got to a point where Jon kept changing things, not just for the sake of change, but in order to try to evolve the show. Yeah. And it was always very interesting, and it normally worked. And if something didn't, we wouldn't, continue it. But after a while, it evolved to a point where I didn't like what we were doing anymore. I didn't like the way we were doing it. So I wasn't that into it anymore. And right. So I hung around for a little while and then was like, I got to go.
Plus, by that point you had, 8 Emmys. Having 9, that just seems excessive, doesn't it?
It's selfish.
Yeah. Other people could use the Emmy. And they're heavy, right? How heavy are they?
Oh yeah, we reinforced the floor in our house to hold them up.
Where do you keep them? Where do you keep them in your house?
They're kind of surprisingly big and heavy. I remember the first one I won actually was in 2001, so we didn't actually go to the show. Because it was
September 11th.
It was supposed to be in September. I think it actually went on in October. And so I found out, we watched it at a bar in Midtown, and I have a picture of me. Somebody snapped a picture of me as they announced it, which is pretty cool.
That's very cool.
And I have that picture. And then I had, I knew I was my family was still in California. So I had the trophy shipped to my mother's house, and I opened it there for Christmas.
Oh, that's sweet.
Yeah, so that was the first time I have that picture too, and it really was. Took it out of the box, and it was like, holy shit! Wow, this thing is crazy. No, I just, I have a little space in my little home office that has, humble brag, ran out of space for my Emmys. So there are five of them over there on shelves. Actually, when we were renovating,
Where are the other 3?
Well, I wanted shelves in this spot by my office because there was nothing else really to put there, and it's kind of like a little tiny alcove. And I thought like, I'll just this is a great spot for like some bookshelves. So just put some shelves in here. So they put them in, and then I realized, I could probably put my Emmys on those, but they had already put in these kind of floating shelves. Yeah. And so I had to go to these guys, and I put my Emmy, and it didn't fit. It was too tall. So I had to say to them, can you take down those shelves? Put up.
Dude, they're sanding the base of it. They're sanding down the base so they can get it in there.
Yeah. Well, it was like a few inches. So I said, I can fit some of these in here though. So I need you to change these shelves and make them so they'll fit these Emmys. And so they did that. And then there's 2 in a shelf up high on the living room, and there's 1 at my aunt's lake house.
All right. Do the kids ever play with them?
No, but I sort of have them. Look, there's the first one, and then there's the one that we won when my wife was pregnant with my son, and so that's his. And so then there was the one that we won when my wife was pregnant with my daughter. So that's hers.
Sweet. Yeah.
And then there was one that we won when I brought my mother to the show. And so that's hers. And then, and the other 4 are for sale.
on eBay right now. If I were to type it in, you could just boom,
Yeah.
Buy now or just bid it out and see.
Yeah, you can buy now for $23.50. I'm trying to unload these things.
They're heavy and they don't fit in your bookshelves. So
yeah, that's right.
Poor planet.
Can't keep changing my bookshelves.
So you meet your wife. You're a writer for The Daily Show. How do you meet your wife? Is it love at first sight? Is she completely impressed by how witty and charming you are? Tell me the story. Tell me the story of meeting her.
Yes to both. She was, especially the second thing. I'm sure she was extremely impressed by my wittiness and charm. Well, like most things in my life, it was Daily Show related. She, her cousin worked on the show, and he took her to the Emmys one year, and that was the year that I took my mother, and because I was actually in the middle of a divorce. And so I took my mother, and the her cousin, I didn't know it was her cousin at work, but he had started dating this woman, and he was going to bring her to the Emmys. And so I thought, oh, he's bringing his girlfriend to the Emmys. Yeah. And so then I got there, and my mom hadn't gotten there yet. And I saw my friend and this woman in the hotel lobby at the Standard downtown hotel, where every room has a big chair that looks like a hand. And I said, oh, wow, well, look at that. His girlfriend is really cute, you know? And then he introduced her as his cousin. And you know, I didn't meet him after that.
You got a little weird after
that. I pushed him aside. And yeah, you guys, I told him, you can go.
Do you think she said, oh man, look at that sweet guy. He brought his mom. Or do you think she said, God, why couldn't that guy get a date? He's got his mom.
No, she didn't know that. She didn't know that yet. And I mean, you know, the story gets a little sad. There's illnesses and death involved in the story. So I don't need to get into the details, but my mother, it was cancer. Her mother had died of cancer. When she met my mother, you know, which she did, not just because she was there with everybody, my mom came. But my mom was very, very sick and didn't want to come down, or was questioning whether or not she should. But we all knew at that point, it was, you know, past the point of the doctor saying there's really nothing we can do. And so she and I had talked about it, and we were pretty open about it. So I told her, like, look, you know, she says, I don't think I can go down. She had a pretty consistent nurse at the time. And I said, well, look, you know, you may as well die at the Emmys. You know, I mean, what a way to go. And she's like, yeah, okay. So I flew her and her nurse down, and she got all gussied up and came in, and we won. And she got to, you know, she was very sickly looking at that point and was in a wheelchair, but she got to carry an Emmy around in a wheelchair for the rest of the night. So she basically got to meet whoever she wanted to meet. And sweet. She met a bunch of people, and it was really fun.
Who did you want to meet? Who were the people who were top of her list?
She met Glenn Close. And of course, you know, it's an old lady with an Emmy in her lap. You can't not talk to her, right?
Right.
So she met. She was very excited to meet the guy who played House. Oh yeah. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do. Yeah.
I can't remember his name for some rereason, but she was his favorite actor.
Tony Shalhoub, right? Tony Shalhoub.
No. How? That's a different. That's Monk.
Oh my, you're right.
That's a different one name show. But he had played the Blackadder, I think, or something like that. She loved this guy. And at one point, after we won, usually you go through this big gauntlet in the backstage, but I came out first and gave the trophy to my mom, and then went back to do all the press stuff that we do. And so she was sitting there with it, and this guy had just presented, and he was walking up the aisle, and she said hello, and so he stopped and talked to her. Oh. So he got to meet her, she got to meet him, and then on the way out that night, there was like nobody out there as I was bringing her to her car to bring her back to the hotel, and all of a sudden I hear my mother say, "Is that a Jeremy Piven?" Is that a Jeremy Piven?
Not the.
I was like, what? A Jeremy Piven, she said.
Yeah.
And I look up, and I mean, we're alone out in front of the Forum or wherever it was, and it's night. And here's Jeremy Piven on his phone walking by. And at first I was like, he's got a kind of a reputation for not being the nicest guy. And I see that he's like on his phone. I'm like, oh boy, here we go. But to his credit, he looked down, saw this, and said, I got to call you back, and talked to my mom for a while. So Big ups to Jeremy Piven, a Jeremy Piven, not necessarily the. So
well, it kind of reminds me of like the search for a Jon Stewart type. You had maybe your mom was used to that. Maybe he was like, if he wasn't Jeremy Piven, he was close to Jeremy Piven.
It was just a really funny phrasing, and so that was it. And then she didn't last too long after that, which was sad, but she got to have that experience. So it was pretty cool. And that's where I met my wife. So, but we didn't start dating until after, because I was busy flying back and forth, taking care of my mom.
Yeah. So meet your wife, you have your children while you're still writing for the Daily Show. I can only imagine that is, sort of the most full-time of full-time jobs, in which you're probably working, right up into the show starts filming. How was it, then? Is that how it really was? I mean, was it tough to balance, being a dad with being a writer?
Well, our first kid wasn't born until 2010. Been there a long time. The show actually was kind of a bit famous within the industry for being like almost like a 9 to 5 gig, or certainly the closest thing you could possibly get on a writing staff. It was very uncommon because we taped at 6 o'clock, and there wasn't much to do at night because so much shit happened and so much was going to change. We had to start, work on some more evergreen stuff, but we didn't need that much evergreen stuff. And so unless you were working on something in particular that kept you late, you'd go home even once the taping started. There was no point in being there. But you'd be home watching TV and stuff, but you would still be home. Yeah. And then we would go in at 9 for a meeting. I think the first meeting was at 9, and so when we had kids, I was still able to bring them over to like nursery school when they got to that point, and then head over to work afterwards. And you're home for dinner and stuff like that. So it wasn't some tragically difficult thing,
Yeah.
Although that was as on staff. If I was indeed the head writer, or like the executive producer, they're required to stay there through the taping, and they have a discussion afterwards, and it's a different job. But for me, it wasn't. It was difficult, but it was not typical like that. Like dad's never home kind of thing.
Right. Good.
And now dad is only at home.
Which is where I want to go next.
Yes. So, now it goes to like, Jesus Christ, dad's always home.
Can he go somewhere else? Like, wait, he's there again. What? Did he just move his Emmys around today? What is dad doing?
Oh my God. What did he do? Is he shining them again? What's happening? The butt groove in the couch is getting too deep. Something's got to be done.
Let's get to that. So you leave the Daily Show. You do a couple other things. You were Jimmy Fallon. Jimmy Fallon for a little bit, just for a little bit. Right, for some other things. But then, your kids are getting older, and you and your wife have this discussion about, what are you going to do? Like, are you going to hire a caregiver? Is one of you going to pull back? Is one of you going to become the primary parent? How did that conversation go? And how did you become the one who either was selected or put his hand up to be the lead dad in your house?
Well, that conversation was earlier when I left the Daily Show, because we talked about it like a year before I left, and then then more seriously, like I made kind of a drama out of it. I left the same. I announced that I was leaving the show the same day, 18 years to the day after I started, stuff like that.
Right.
And then I was gone later that month, but it was a year before I was like, oh man, this is not becoming kind of a drag. And then a half a year after that, then she and I had this conversation, and the kids were very young, they were 4 and 2 or something. Mm-hmm. And I said, I just don't want to be there. And she just said, okay. She said, then don't. And so I left, and then what I didn't anticipate, like I didn't really want to work anywhere for a while. I was kind of burned out on top of that. So I was only off for a month or two before somebody offered me a job, helping them develop a show. And I was like, yeah, of course, sure. I'd love to. So I go do that. You do that for a few months, and then and then I'm off for a couple of months. Somebody offered me another job, and I wasn't really looking for stuff, but it kept getting offered up, and they were different writing gigs, and usually developing shows, and for different amounts of time, and some lasted more than others. Mm-hmm. And then that just kind of kept going that way without any of them really taking grip, which was too bad. A couple of them were good projects that would have been nice. And then honestly, it just sort of dried up a little bit, and I didn't really think about it. And then I just kind of became somebody who was at home doing, only stuff that I wanted to do, and it's working. So we were like, all right. I mean, I'll probably be looking for work in one form or another soon enough, far more actively than I have been, because the kids at this point now are starting to be able to kind of take care of themselves a little bit,
Yep. But when you really embrace this when they're quite young, kids are notoriously taxing. They rob us of sleep. Did being a comedy writer equip you, you think, better than other parents to handle the sort of absurdities of young kids in parenting? Has it given you anything you
It
can
would
share
have
with
if
any
my
tips?
it would have if my dumb kids knew any popular references. You know, I mean, what am I supposed to do when they don't understand the joke?
You can't
I
explain
can't
a
explain
joke.
everything to them.
No, it's not funny when you explain the joke.
No, they got to get out there and live a little. Read a paper every once in a while if you want to understand Daddy. I can't walk you through this.
Come on, there aren't any tips. There aren't any tips. Were you able to lighten it up at all and see the sort of? Was there any tips for non-funny lead dads out there that you could share?
Well, yeah, don't try to be too funny. Your kids don't really think you're funny. My kids often don't think I'm funny either. They feel like, if dollars were eye rolls, I'd be way richer. I'd be filthy rich right now. But I think most dads know like how to have fun with their kids. It's just about being present. It's being in the moment. It's showing interest in the things that they do and listening to the songs that you hate that they like, and letting them play them in the car and messing around with them and just kind of being there and trying not to yell. I'm no model parent. I've had plenty of issues, but you get better at it, and I'm just sort of naturally goofy and playful, I think, for sure. So that makes it a little easier. But like I said, the kids don't always want to do that. They're not always the best audience. Sometimes they're like, if it was between them and a bunch of surly drunks at a late night open mic, I might take off and go to the open mic.
Fantastic. What about, one of the things that's often difficult for sort of, lead dads is to find a shorthand to explain what they do when they meet other dads. When you were a writer for The Daily Show, that would have been easy. I'm a writer for The Daily Show. I was a longtime columnist for the New York Times. Like I said, I'm a columnist for the New York Times, and I wouldn't even really go into the part about me being a lead dad. What do you say when you, meet, guys that, perhaps through your wife's job or just, I know you go up to your aunt's house a lot when you're meeting people out there. How does that introduction go?
Well, it's always different. We talked about this before, and I actually gave it some thought as to really kind of having a standard line, which would be easier to deal with, like being more prepared for that question, because it's a fairly common question when you meet somebody. But here, I'll run my new answer by you. See what you think. Ready? So you asked me what I do.
Yeah. Hey, JR, what do you do?
I think this is going really well. I think I'm just going to say what I do, which is I stay busy. That's what I do now.
I like
stay
it
busy
because it's kind of elusive, and they're not quite sure what you could stay busy doing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if they want to find that out, that's fine. I mean, do you work? Well, no, it depends on how you define work. If you define work by getting paid to do something, then no, I don't work at the moment. But if you define work by, waking up before 7 o'clock to cook your kids breakfast and pack their lunches and get them off and clean the place up and, make sure the fridge is full and doing all of that kind of shit that takes longer than you think it does because you aren't accustomed to doing it. And then, people have hobbies. My hobby is writing. So when I get that free 3 or 4 hours, if I get that, I try to sit down and work on whatever project I'm working on. I wrote my wife her aunt is married to a very successful businessman who's almost 90 years old now and is long since retired. But he is, very generous guy, very successful guy, and everybody kind of loves him, and he's really fun to talk to. And I wanted to kind of get to know him a little better, so I offered to write kind of a biography of him, and I ended up doing that, and it ended up being a kind of a much bigger thing because I interviewed him, but I didn't tell him that I was also interviewing all of his family and
Yeah.
a bunch of his friends. And then his wife knew that I was doing this, and his daughter knew that I was doing this. And they agreed to get like a book made. You can go online and get the books made. So we wrote it up, and it's a real book, not that we're selling, but that we did for the family. But it was a project. It's what I like doing, and I completed it. And now I'm working on another book. It reminds me of a story actually that can kind of go along, I think, with this and with dads who may be looking for something to do or thinking maybe they don't have enough to do or what they do is insignificant, I think maybe. I watched it again this morning. I remember seeing a commencement speech at a military school, and it was given by a guy with the patches and the whole thing. And, he was an admiral or something. I don't know who the guy was really. But I remember seeing this clip, and he's talking about how when he was in the Navy SEALs, the first thing that they would do every morning is his commanding officers would come in and they would inspect his bed, right? Make sure it was made properly. And he had to have all the corners folded a certain way. Everything had to be tight. The blanket had to be down here and folded perfectly. The pillow had to be fluffed perfectly and set in exactly as centered in the right place and all that stuff. And when they passed inspection, then they could go on with the rest of their day, right? But he got used to doing that. And he talks about how you might think of it as a mundane task because it kind of is.
Yeah.
But it's also, for him, for a very long time in a very specific way, was the first thing that he accomplished every single day. And it set the tone for accomplishing more things, regardless of how insignificant they might think. But everything becomes an accomplishment. And he says that you can't really, if you can't accomplish the small things, then you can't accomplish the big things. So there's a lot more weight on that and a lot more purpose to that. And then he closed it by saying that if you end up having a bad day, then when you get home, at least your bed is made.
Your bed's made. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's kind of like that. A lot of what I do, it's like there's little things that I find myself doing all day long that, the kids don't notice, the wife might not notice, you wouldn't know. But I know they get done. And I know that if they didn't, then, things wouldn't be operating the way they do. So I don't think of them as insignificant. I think of everything that happens throughout my day as something significant, something that needs to get done. And if I'm the guy that's doing it, then great.
J.R. Havlan, that's a great way to end. Thank you for being my guest on the Company of Dads podcast. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
You're welcome. Nice to talk to you, Paul.